Thank you very much, Doron, for your very kind introduction. I hope you can all hear me well. Good evening or good morning, according to what part of the world you are inhabiting. Thank you for joining. I will go directly into my lecture, but I will start by sharing my PowerPoint presentation first. So let me, okay. You should be able to see my PowerPoint presentation in this moment. Perfect. All right. So in my lecture, I am going to delineate the main traits of my ongoing research project on Italian Jewish prayer books printed in the long 19th century. The aim of this project is to carry out a digital and conceptual analysis of 19th century Italian prayer books, Sidurim and Mahzorim, with the purpose of utilizing them as objects of historical inquiry. The tools I'm using to carry out this analysis consist of an inventory, digitization, and transcription of these prayer books with HTR software, handwritten text recognition, in order to enable a digital text analysis. It is part of a larger and very ambitious project called Minhag Europa, of which so far only the Dutch part of it, called Minhag Holland, has started and is still at a very initial phase at the University of Amsterdam, and my own project at the Leibniz Institute of European History in Mainz, Germany. My part of the project is currently in the middle of its development, having recently started its digital phase. This means that, of course, I do not yet have the final results of the digital analysis, but I am in the middle of it. The three main innovative aspects of the project are: one, the fact that the object of inquiry are printed books as opposed to medieval manuscripts. Up to now, the vast majority of research in the field of book history within the Jewish studies has focused on medieval manuscripts. Concentrating on printed books would constitute a change of this paradigm. Two, within the realm of book history, the special attention will be to prayer books. We will see in which way this is different from previous approaches. Three, the digital methodology and tool. So why prayer books? Well, they are the most intensively printed type of book in Judaism, as they are very diffused and frequently used, hence often reprinted in new editions. It is difficult to have an exact statistical estimate. However, if we look at the thesaurus of the Hebrew book of Isaiah Vinograd, which contains a quite exhaustive list of printed Hebrew books from the invention of printing to 1863, we see that the index of editions of biblical books takes 5 pages, while the list of editions of prayer books takes over 13 pages. This, of course, does not tell us the total number of printed copies, which is not what interests us here, but it is a strong indicator of the high frequency of reprints. Although they are prominent in Jewish life, prayer books have received little academic attention, mostly focused on the study of Jewish liturgy or on the reconstruction of its origins through the investigation of ancient and medieval manuscripts. The printed Mahzorim and Sidurim, instead, have generally been considered as a stable factor whose dynamics would be unworthy of analysis. As canonical works, it is true that prayer books maintained a certain uniformity in space and time, particularly after the invention of printing. By contrast, the project's point of departure is that even the small changes of the many different editions can actually reflect substantial developments in the political and cultural perception and self-perception of a specific Jewry in a specific place and time. 19th century Italy is an ideal setting for the proposed analysis because of the simultaneous presence of different Jewish groups. The Italkim, the Ashkenazim, the Sephardim, just to mention the main ones, and the substantial socio-cultural changes Italian Jews underwent across the age of civil emancipation. This encounter with modernity had a deep impact on Italian, mainly Orthodox Jewry, which had to develop its own adaptation strategies to modernity, including modifications of the liturgy, also as a reaction to innovation instances proposed by the Reform movement. Thus, the digital text analysis will be used to single out such changes of the different editions and consequently will help me attempt to answer the following macro questions, among others. Which social, cultural, and political changes are reflected through these textual variations? How do prayer books attest to the construction of their owner's Jewish identity? Can we establish changing patterns relating to Sidurim and Machzorim as religious sacred objects over time? How do materiality and spirituality relate to each other? Let me now define the corpus of my sources in a more precise way. What do I mean by Minhag Italia? In the 19th century, Italian Jewry was characterized by a strong fragmentation and by the small size of its many communities scattered throughout the peninsula in the several small states which became unified as a country in 1861. In each pre-unification state, Jewish communities underwent at times radically different legislation, determining strongly diverging socioeconomic conditions. This, in turn, determined different organizational forms of the communities themselves and in relation to the central authority, thus also a variety of relations with the surrounding Catholic majority and even different perspectives on Judaism itself. In a word, we cannot paint 19th century Italian Jews with a single brush. As far as the small demographical size of Italian Jewry as a whole and of its single communities as well, we see that, for instance, Rome's Jewish community, the oldest and largest single community of the time, counted about 5,000 Jews. Livorno's community, the second largest, had about 4,000 Jews. In 1861, the Jewish population of the peninsula was just short of 40,000 people over a total Italian population of about 26 million. That is less than 0.2% of the total population. In addition to this geopolitical fragmentation, there is also a diversification of Jewish groups, as we said. If the main group was formed by the so-called Italkim, the original, let's say, Italian Jews, now present for more than 2,000 years, we have also a significant presence of Sephardim and Ashkenazim. In addition to the Jewish presence on the peninsula, we have relevant communities of Italian Jews that settled around the Mediterranean. Roughly speaking, mostly Sephardi merchants from Livorno, for example, and other Italian cities, who, thanks to their famous trading networks, settled in port cities like Corfu, Salonika, Istanbul, but also Alexandria, Tunis, or Algiers, to name just some examples, and started importing Italian Jewish communities in those cities. My corpus, however, will be limited to the prayer books used by Jews residing in the Italian peninsula. This includes all the three groups of Italians, Sephardim and Ashkenazim, so not only the Italkim, but leaves out intentionally all the aforementioned Italian communities in the Mediterranean. This choice is first of all dictated by the necessity of keeping a manageable corpus in terms of dimension. And the second reason, equally important, is that including these Mediterranean communities would vastly complicate the analysis in terms of variety and number of the different socio-political environments I would have to consider. Let us now delve a bit deeper in the decision process for the aforementioned changes of the different editions. Who were the main actors in deciding such changes? I would identify four different parties. One, If we look especially at the 19th century, it is a time of nation formation throughout Europe, as it is well known. And in the years preceding Italy's unification of 1861, many local communities started to feel the need to harmonize and crystallize their liturgy. Thus, Jewish communities, not only in Italy, but all around Europe, addressed Jewish intellectuals whom they considered experts of Jewish culture in general and of liturgy in particular, who would act as developers and editors of the prayer books. They had to be well-known and highly esteemed people who are familiar with all the historical developments of the liturgy and had sufficient authority to crystallize such canonical books in a sort of definitive print. For instance, we can cite Wolf Heidenheim in Germany, very influential for Ashkenazi communities, and Shmuel David Luzzatto in Italy, the famous Shaddal, about whom we will talk more in detail later on. 2, rabbis and the religious leaders of the community. As we will see later on, a rabbi's personal inclination towards either reform or orthodoxy could determine a whole community's direction towards one or the other form of Judaism, or at least generate contrast within the community. This means the adoption of one type of liturgy or another. 3, the lay leaders of a community, who are often called capi. In some situations, they would be the actors promoting liturgical or other kinds of changes, not always in harmony with the religious leaders. But 4, I would identify also the publishers themselves. This is something I will be able to verify more accurately through the final digital analysis. But there are often situations, especially in Livorno, a city with multiple publishers owning Hebrew types, in which in the same year, a certain publisher printed 3 different editions of the same Mahzor, for instance, one for each group, Italkim, Sephardim, and Ashkenazim. The first impression, which will have to be verified, is that economical choices played a role in a certain process of homogenization of the texts, since using the same metrics for different editions would have saved the printer a lot of time. What do we really want to find out? What previous concepts do we want to challenge, if any? Well, of course, we also want to look at changes determined by the different approaches to Jewish identity, modernity, and nationalism. However, we also want to look, for instance, at the construction of new prayer books of new groups, such as the Reform movement, and the fact that this in turn inspired changes also in the Orthodox prayer book. Can we really mark the borders between the two? How different are the liturgies really? For instance, it is said that the Sephardi prayer books inspired the Reform. Is it really true? It is said that the Hasidim are also inspired by the Sephardi prayer books. Although this doesn't concern Italy in particular, but we can wonder this as well. Is it really true? Basically, through the prism of the prayer book, we can challenge traditional Jewish categories and ask ourselves questions like, what is Orthodox? What is Reform? What is Sephardi? What is Ashkenazi, Italian, etc.? These are questions to which I don't have an answer yet. I would like to have an answer at the end of my project. So let us now talk a little bit more about, let's say, the historiography or bibliography concerning the development of Jewish prayer books in Italy in particular. I will just say a few things, actually. So we mentioned the scarcity of secondary literature on Jewish prayer books as historical sources. But we do have a rich bibliography on the development of liturgy, on Piyut, for example, the liturgical poetry, and also partly on Italian prayer books. It would be too long to go over it now completely, But let me just briefly elaborate on one case. Actually, this is the wrong slide. Here. So, concerning the Italian Mahzor, a special mention should be made for Shmuel David Luzzatto, the aforementioned Shaddal, the most prominent Italian Jewish intellectual in the 19th century. Although he never published a comprehensive work on the subject, Luzzatto's interest in the history of Italian Jewish liturgy is well known. We should mention his Italian translation of the Ashkenazi Siddur, published in 2 editions in 1821 and 1829, and the Italian translation of the Siddur of the Italkim. Here in the slide, we see, for example, on the right side, Seder Tfilah, che fi Minhag Italia, Formulario delle orazioni degli Israeliti, secondo il rito italiano. This is like the 1829 translation of Shmuel David Luzzatto of the Siddur, according to the Italian rite. But the zenith of his research on Italian Minhag, however, can be considered his edition with long historical introduction of the Mahzor Bnei Roma, Mahzor of the Children of Rome, which is the other name by which the Italian rite is known. This text was published in 1856 in Livorno by Belforte, in fact, before Italy's unification of 1861, but already in a time in which the political hopes for the Risorgimento national movement, that is the movement that aimed at Italy's liberation from foreign powers and unification, started to feel somewhat realistic, and the wish of a uniformed Italian rite was growing among the different communities of the peninsula. So in this slide here on the left side, I'm showing Shaddal's works with the Italian rites, actually both on the right and on the left, but we should always keep in mind that, as we said before, on the peninsula also other rites were present and are equally objects of my investigation. As you can see here on the left side, the Mahzor Kol Hashana, che fi Minhag Italiani, but this one printed in Livorno with the introduction of Shmuel David Luzzatto. This one entirely written, however, in the Hebrew language. So let me actually go back to a map that I started showing earlier, which is this one. So this is a map representing all the printing locations of the Mahzorim only in Italy and or for Italian Jews in the long 19th century. So let me say a few things about first how I generated this map. So I generated this map with an excellent and easy to use and open source georeferencing tool designed by Stanford University called Palladio, which is quite well known among digital humanists in the Jewish studies, with which it is possible to create maps using the geographical coordinates of the selected locations and any type of quantitative values associated to these locations. The software will then generate dots that are proportionally large to the manually inserted quantity. This program could do also a lot more than what I did in this case, as it can generate networks, for instance, as well. You see here on their homepage an example of locations with dots and different networks. But let's have a look again at the map. So in this case, as you can see, Livorno here stands out by far with 111 different editions of Mahzorim in 118 years, if we consider the long 19th century. almost one edition per year on average. So let us not forget that in this map, we're only talking about the Mahzorim, so without counting the Sidurim and other smaller prayer books, which I'm not considering. So now the difficulty of my search consisted in the fact that, on the one hand, not all prayer books printed in Italy were to be used in Italy. So Livorno, for instance, exported a large part of its prints, mostly to the aforementioned Mediterranean locations, but also to Northern Europe. While on the other hand, not all prayer books for Italian Jews were printed in Italy. As you can see here, Vienna is also a prominent location. It's actually, concerning the Mahzorim, the second largest dot that you can see. Why? Because in Vienna were mostly printed all the Mahzorim that were then used by the Jewish community residing in the Italian portion of the Habsburg Empire, part of the Habsburg Empire until 1866 in the Northeast. So let's say Trieste, Venice, Padua, etc. But an important printing house was exactly in Vienna. The previous one that we saw that published also Luzzato's translation of the Sidur, that of Anton Schmidt, that was the most prominent publisher in Habsburg with Hebrew types. So initially, I was wondering how I could identify all these patterns. Like, how could I identify which prayer books were actually printed, in other words, for Jewish community residing in the peninsula, if some of those printed in the Italian peninsula were actually exported abroad, and some of those for the Italian peninsula were actually printed elsewhere. So, well, luckily the titles often indicate for which specific communities they were printed, which made it easier in a way. But nevertheless, it was necessary to check city by city and verify all the titles. In total, I have singled out a corpus of over 230 different editions of Sidurim and Mahzorim printed for Jewish communities residing in the peninsula in the long 19th century. However, the other problem is that I needed to deal with the availability of sources, since only a part of this large corpus had already been digitized at the start of my project, and the pandemic did not help with the possibility of carrying out further digitization. Nevertheless, partly through what was already available and partly through new digitization, I can now work with the corpus of about 110 between Mahzorim and Sidurim, which are absolutely sufficient for the intended analysis. So now, having defined the corpus and partly the historiography, let's go a little bit deeper into the topic. Well, I spoiled the surprise. Let me restart like this, and then I will put the next slide soon. So now that we have defined the subject, let us see if we can already identify some important changes in the development of 19th century Italian Jewish liturgy, even before having the results of the digital textual analysis, which is still ongoing. In fact, if on the one hand, my project aims at identifying and analyzing micro, albeit relevant textual changes, on the other hand, we should not forget that the digital analysis is not the goal, but rather the tool, that is the means by which I want to achieve a result. Thus, the project's final purpose, that is the use of prayer books and liturgy as historical sources, should always be my North Star. With this in mind, there are indeed also some macro changes that can help my analysis. In the 19th century, an important motor of liturgical change was certainly the Reform movement. The first element that we need to consider is whether the Reform movement has had an impact in the development of prayer books in the Italian peninsula? Well, the short answer is yes, but how? A traditional misconception of scholarship on Italian Judaism is that, unlike Germany, for instance, Italy did not have an own reform movement. In a very recent article, Asher Sala, an Italian-Israeli scholar, has convincingly debunked this myth by showing abundant evidence of Italian reform projects. If it is true, according to Sala, and one can agree, that Italy did not have a full-fledged and organized reform movement, it is, however, false that reform attempts did not take place in the Italian peninsula. On the contrary, in the same article, Sala illustrates the reform propositions of a number of prominent Italian Jewish intellectuals, both lay people and rabbis, in order to show that in Italy too, there was a cultural terrain on which reform instances could actually develop. Reform projects, of course, embrace the whole spectrum of Jewish life, from halakha to liturgy, from social customs to education. Here, I will only focus on the liturgical aspects, and more in particular, on the textual dimension of the prayer books. Thus, among the reform proposals, disregarding their actual application or not, we notice a certain trend to eliminate what they thought distinguished the Jewish population from their non-Jewish compatriots too much, such as tefillin, the phylacteries, and tzitzit, the ritual fringes, or the sound of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, but also other elements, the inclusion of women in the synagogue worship and in the completion of a minyan, the introduction of an organ, the use of Italian in sermons, the abolition of the chalitza, the tradition of the levirate marriage, the removal of the days of Chol HaMoed, the weekdays of the festivals, but also a radical change, such as the acceptance of intermarriage. Concerning the mere prayer book, the tendency was towards a substantial shortening of the prayers, but also an elimination, for instance, of all the prayers referring to Zion and to Messianic times. It is now clear that actually there was quite a widespread support for reform in Italy. If these were the theoretical foundations or proposals for Jewish reform in Italy, how many of these changes were actually implemented? Let us bear in mind that the year of reference for reform communities is 1818, when the first Reformed temple was opened in Hamburg, Germany. So in spite of the aforementioned widespread support for reform instances, the first institutional implementations of reform in Italy took place rather late. In 1869, the community of Alessandria in Piedmont, northwestern Italy, temporarily split over a reduction of the prayer's length, in which the rabbi, the Veali, and the most orthodox part of the community did not accept such shortenings, but were finally forced to accept them in 1870. In the same years, we have the foundation of the first official Reformed temple in Nice, which was an Italian territory until 1860. This Reformed temple lived alongside the Orthodox synagogue, for example. Nice was then followed by Padua in 1875 and by Asti in 1889, where the prayers were recited by the cantor only and the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, was entirely abolished. Even more interestingly for today's topic, much more before the official institution of Reformed temples, Reformed prayer books were published completely in the Italian language, not simply with an Italian translation parallel to the original Hebrew text, which can be found as early as 1802 to the best of my knowledge, but exclusively Italian texts. Among them, some of you might know about it and recognize it. The most noteworthy is Rabbi Marco Tedeschi's Imre Lev, Preghiere di un cuore israelita, published in this case by Paglieri in Asti in 1852, which is actually the translation of a prayer book in French published by the Rabbi of Strasbourg in 1848. This prayer book was entirely in Italian, except for the title itself and for the headers of the different prayers, which were left in Hebrew, at times transliterated. The book even contains the indication of the prayers that had been removed. You can see here on the left side, Imre Lev, the title left in Hebrew, Preghiere d'un cuore israelita, etc., the rest of the title page in Italian, while inside the text of the prayers was entirely in Italian, only the headers were in Hebrew, with an indication even of those that had been removed. You see here on top, the Shacharit, the morning prayer. It says in Italian, preghiera tolta dal rituale, a prayer removed from the ritual. The impact, oh, what happened? It's not, can you still see my presentation?
No, it jumped to your browser.
That's strange. Let me see if this is strange now. Perhaps like this. You see now?
No, now you stopped sharing.
Okay, so let me do it again. I don't know what happened. Okay, is it back?
Perfectly, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, so talking about the Imre Lev. So the book, so the impact of the Imre Lev and therefore of a reformed liturgy on Italian predominantly Orthodox Jewry should be studied in depth if we consider that it was a rather diffused prayer book among Italian Jews, according to several important scholars. This prayer book alone was reprinted in more than 10 editions just in the 19th century. It is clear that, if not at an institutional level, it is high time to reassess the impact of reform on Italian Judaism. Independently from the institutional success of the reform projects proposed by a part of the Italian Jewish intellectual elite, lay and religious, this wind of change inevitably invested orthodoxy as well and favored changes within it too. On a general liturgical level, for instance, some changes became widely accepted, such as the placement of the bima, the pulpit, in front of the Aron HaKodesh, the chamber containing the Torah scrolls, in resemblance of the altar in a Christian church, the use of a particular rabbinical garment, the acceptance of the organ, or the introduction of a bat mitzvah for the girls. In other words, as Gadi Luzzato Voghera noticed, in different respects, Italian Jews often tended to adhere to Christian models about them, including an adaptation of the liturgy and its performances to those of the Catholic majority. If we focus on the specific topic of my research, we can observe the appearance of the first Italian translations of the prayer book already at the beginning of the 19th century, as aforementioned. So I'd like to show it here. To be more precise, but here, so we're back into the Orthodox field, of course, 1802, we're not talking about reform anymore, but the first Siddur I found with Italian translation with facing Hebrew text, page by page, dates back to 1802, to the best of my knowledge at least. And interestingly enough, it is an edition printed in Basel, Switzerland, for the Sephardi communities in Italy. You can understand the difficulty, therefore, of singling out all the printing locations for the different communities. This Siddur alone can tell us so much about Italian Jewry at the beginning of the 19th century. First of all, the fact that the first one requiring an Italian translation is actually addressed to the Sephardi communities. You can see here in the center of the slide, Seder Tfilah, just left in Hebrew, orazioni quotidiane per uso degli ebrei, spagnoli e portoghesi, daily prayers for the Spanish and Portuguese Jews, the Sephardi communities, and inside the text, the header, on one side actually the Hebrew text, and on the other side the Italian translation of the same text. As you can see, for those of you who are not familiar, most of you probably are, but for those of you who are not familiar with the prayer book, the main text of the prayer is written in a Hebrew square script, while the instructions are written in the so-called Rashi script, this more difficult script here to read, in a sense. This layout, let's say, the structure is taken again in the Italian translation, where the instructions are written in italics. Being from 1802, however, this shows also that innovations, such as the translation of the prayers, were not only spurred by reform instances, but were also somewhat indicators of ongoing changes, of an ongoing process. In any case, the relation orthodoxy reform in Italy is potentially one of the elements that might be reassessed through my digital analysis. Okay, so, but having defined, also a bit more deeply the object, the subject also of the research, I would like to talk a little bit more in depth about the methodology. Because of course, this is could be one of the most interesting aspects of it, and it's one of the innovative parts. So I would like to illustrate the some methodological aspects of this project, since they use the tools of the digital humanities. It is important to premise that I am not a computer scientist, but an historian, and therefore in my digital analysis, I am supported by stronger experts of digital approaches, such as the entire digital humanities department of my own institute, headed by Thorsten Wübbener, or for instance, Professor Daniel Stöckel-Ben-Ezra of the École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris, or Dr. Sinai Ruzinek of the University of Haifa. Their support is crucial for the success of the project, given that, of course, the possible inaccuracies would only be my own responsibility. As aforementioned, the first phase consisted in an identification and location of all the sources. This was not extremely easy due to the fact that I did not have one specific title to search, nor one location, but I had to look at publishers within and outside the Italian peninsula. Essentially, this was a bibliographical search in which I needed to read most title pages in order to identify the addressees of a certain prayer book. This was partly accomplished very traditionally on paper, on the aforementioned Vinograd bibliography, which is excellent as it divides its entries thematically, but has the limit of 1863 in terms of covered material. The rest was done online. I have to say that thankfully, the National Library of Israel possesses at least one copy of most Italian prayer books, and a good part of them are already digitized and available online. This made my research possible in spite of the pandemic. Plus, I was able to retrieve some other prayer books at the Terracini Archive of Jewish Traditions and Customs in Turin, which I was able to digitize thanks to some institutional funds. The second phase, the one in which I am now, is the most eminently digital. The digital approach is necessary for two reasons. In order to recognize these micro changes in the different editions, I have to consider the size of my corpus, of course. So the mere size of my corpus, if you consider that an average, let's say, of 400 pages per prayer book, multiplied, in my case, by 110, makes about 44,000 pages of material. But also because with today's digital instruments, I can potentially obtain even more than a simple identification of microtextual differences. For the first step in this phase, I need to transform all the scanned prayer books in digitally approachable texts, as they are now simple JPEG or PDF images. For this, I am using a transcription software tool, specifically the platform eScriptorium, which uses the transcription software Kraken. I will now illustrate something more about this. Because exactly, you need to keep in mind, this second actually digital phase is necessary simply for the preparation of the sources. Because if I want to approach the texts and have a digital analysis, I of course need to have the texts as approachable files, as text files. But right now I only have pictures. Fortunately, today's technology can help. So I will try to show you a little bit by sharing a website. No, this is wrong. How this works. So let me briefly look at what I'm sharing. Here, all the different possibilities. Okay, so Doron, do you now see the web page that I'm showing?
Yes, sir. Yes, doctor.
Okay, very good. So this is how my own portfolio of documents on the website eScriptorium looks like. On this platform, one can upload different images, organize them the way one wants. As you see, I have three different groups of images, which shows that I'm, as I said, in the middle of my digital approach. And in my case, I also have one as a test. I have one Mahzor le Yom Kippur, printed in Livorno in 1823-24. And also, I have a random sample of prayer books. So let me go directly inside this folder here. This is how this appears. So methodologically, in order to prepare then the software for the transcription of all the images that I have, I made a selection, I made a random selection of 4 images per prayer book. Well, as you can see right now, I only have here 375 images. So you might ask, yeah, but that cannot be divided by 4. The reason for it is that one of the prayer books I selected only had 3 pages that were written entirely in Hebrew. Therefore, I could not select 4. And the software that is used by eScriptorium, Kraken, that I mentioned, actually it's good also for bilingual or multilingual texts. This is like, this has been tested on a number of different languages, on really many different languages. And it is particularly good for right to left languages, including Hebrew, of course, or Arabic, but for any right-to-left language. And this is one of the reasons why I selected it, because there are several transcription softwares, but this is the one I'm using. Another reason, it's for its very high accuracy. This is actually an HTR. It uses an HTR software, so handwritten text recognition. That means that it's developed to actually be used on manuscripts, where, as you can imagine, or as you know, the text is very often not very easily visible or readable, neither by the software nor by a person, by a human being. So an HTR software has a higher accuracy, especially when it comes to printed books, which have much higher uniformity in comparison to manuscripts. Although in the 19th century, of course, we don't have yet, the clarity of text that we have in the 20th or in the 21st century. So, and handwritten text recognition software is anyway very useful and works very well for the printed book as well. Many users have verified an accuracy of beyond 99% in the transcription of a text, which is extremely high. Another good reason for using this software is, of course, is that it's open source. That's also not secondary, but the technical reasons are of course even more important. So as you can see here, one after the other, I have all the pages that I randomly selected. One can use different methodologies. One can select, for example, with the simple Python code, Python, relatively easy to use programming software with which one can develop a code for the random selection of anything, in this case of the pages, or one can select them randomly, manually. This is a sufficient way to try to develop a model which then will be used for the transcription of my entire corpus. That part has not been done yet. This is the point of my research at which I am currently. Here you see you can import the files, the images that you want to upload. You can also very simply drop the images and click them in, drop them in this area here, and they will be uploaded. And then already externally here, you can, we will explain what that means, segment the text and transcribe it. Binarize, in our case, is not so important. So this is how it looks, how my random sample looks. But let's go back to all my documents. I would like to make a bit deeper demonstration, and to be sure to not tamper with the work that I have already done, let's go to another text, which I will use just as an example. Here, this is the, excuse me, Max Orle Yom Kippur, printed in Livorno in 1823. You see here, you have just the images. Here you can click on the description, where of course you can insert all the metadata, the meta information concerning your text. This is up to you. One can put the title, which is the main script, the direction, right to left in this case, and add a lot more information here on the side. So let's go back to the images. In this case, I have already previously, because this was my test, segmented and transcribed the text. How does it look? I will open now this page, for example, which is exactly the title page. You see on the left side, this is the original picture. how it was a JPEG, a normal picture. But first of all, the software needs to understand where the text is. Basically, which parts of the ink that the software sees are text. In this case, I have already adjusted, the interpretation of the software. But you have to imagine that the first time that you segment the page, there will be mistakes. To segment the page means exactly to single out, to identify the lines where the text is. You see these purple lines here with the line, vertical line on the side. This indicates where the line starts. Obviously, in our case, right to left. So it starts on the right side. But the thing is that on this page, for example, you have other parts where the software could see a text. And for example, here in the middle, you see the stamp of the library, where it's very faint, but there is some text. But this text has nothing to do with my analysis, with what we want to know. So it can be, in this case, it didn't happen. It can be that the software identifies this as part of the text. Excuse me, Doron, can you still see? It's not clear on my computer if you can still see my screen. Okay, so I assume you can still see it. And but you see, for example, also that there are lines on the side that are vertical or that are upside down, etc., where actually it might be interesting for us to exactly let the software know that there is text in that part. The software will identify the lines, but there might be mistakes. So I can then go and, for example, make the line shorter or longer if I need, or if I don't think that's a part of the text that is important, I can even cut it completely, eliminate it, for instance. It's okay, this is a test. It's not my original. And then I can go to the transcription side. I can click, and line by line, I will see how the transcription has been made. As you can see here, the original text says "Che Minhag Italia Shebe Costantina," but you see in the transcription it's almost everything perfect, but there is one mistake. The software interpreted this het as a bet, so we need to delete it. No, sorry, no, somehow right now it does not. Okay. However, it doesn't put the Hebrew keyboard right now. But okay, we will leave it like this. But you then correct the transcription. You put enter, and it's saved like this. I will have to recorrect it again. But you understood how the process works. You go line by line. You can correct. So this is already the transcription. What happens then with my corrections? The software can learn from my corrections, and therefore, when I do the next transcription after having developed a model based on my corrections, the system, the software, will make fewer mistakes, will make less mistakes, because it will have learned, not on its own, it will have learned from my corrections. Here you can choose all kinds of visualizations. You could visualize just the source image. Let me remove this. You can visualize just the source image if you want, but you can visualize the segmented area. You can visualize the transcription as well, but also the text alone without following the layout. There are many different things that one can do. I showed you just the main elements. So long story short, this is actually, keep in mind that this is actually only the preparation of the texts, the preparation of the files that I can then approach for the digital analysis. And this is the phase in which I am right now. I have done the segmentation and transcription of my sample of random images. I have already corrected segmentation and transcription so that then I can go create a model which then will be used for the transcription of all the rest of the corpus, which then should be transcribed with a higher accuracy. At this point, I need, of course, I can export the text. The text can be exported with a simple TXT text. This is a choice I will make towards the end. But at that point, the real text mining and textual analysis will actually take place. And this is the part that I will have to develop later at the end of my transcription. This is it for now. So thank you very much. Now I'm open to possible questions or clarification. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Grazi. Yes, there are a few questions. Sylvia asked, are the digitized versions available easily online?
No. Well, you mean now? Well, now, yes. In the moment in which I started my project, I anyway had to renounce a part. I had to renounce a part of the corpus because it had not yet been digitized. And due to the pandemic, I could not personally travel to the National Library in Israel and carry out digitization, or anyway, also have local staff carry out the digitizations because the library was closed even for a while, as you might know. So no, it was not easy to obtain all the digitizations. But as I said, luckily, actually, a number of prayer books were already online and available. So those I could use. Between those and some that I had digitized in this Terracini archive in Turin, which contains, which is an archive for Italian Jewish customs and minhagim, I have a corpus which is large enough for my analysis. As I mentioned, about 110 texts, which are now large enough. Of course, ideally, I would have all of them, but it's not, at this point, it's not possible. But no, it wasn't that easy, but now I have the digitizations.
Thank you very much. Valerie asked if there's any contact information for you. So is it okay if I post your email?
Yes, for sure. You can post you have my email address. You can post it in the chat.
Wonderful. I just put it in the chat for anyone who would like to contact Dr. Grazi.
Sure.
Thank you. Lois asked for a reference for the Asher Salah article.
Yes. Let me write this, the person should write me an email, and I will write back with the reference. I have the exact reference, but I don't have it written here, but it was published in 2020 on actually an Italian journal of philosophy called Filosofia Italiana, but I will write but the article is in English, so it's approachable to anyone.
Thank you very much. I just posted your email again. So Sandra says, greetings from Montreal, Canada, and she asks, to what extent do local communities affect your analysis, such as the Orthodox in Venice who followed and still do the Venetian rite?
Very much, very much. I mean, this is well, yes, this is exactly one of the main elements. What I mentioned earlier, this fragmentation of Italian Jewry, which of course it was even more true in the 19th century, but it's still true nowadays. If one takes a siddur of the Italian Jews, a current siddur, for example, one often sees there's a version which is still used in Rome, or a version which is still used in Milan. These are, for the current siddur, the two main points of reference. And then, of course, each single community could have its own differences. This is exactly one of the elements that I want to investigate. Because, as I said, some of the micro differences can be known and are known by the people of those communities, but there can be also smaller differences that are less known, and these are what will be investigated by my digital analysis. But even these macro differences, as I mentioned in the lecture, are also important, even if they are already known, because mostly they have been used just to reconstruct the liturgy. And a simple reconstruction of the liturgy is not the purpose per se of my project, but I exactly aim at saying something exactly about these specific communities, but also on Italian Jewry in general. So the point will be going to look at these differences also of the different communities and try to say something of the history of the Jews, not just of the history of the liturgy. This will be the main point. So short answer is yes, for sure. The different communities will tell me a lot in this respect.
Thank you very much. Abe asked, are you considering the influence of the editor or publisher of each Siddur or Machzor in the choice of wording?
Yes. Yeah, the answer is yes, but one has to create a distinction, of course, and try to identify the reasons why these differences occurred. Of course, you know, the digital tool will help my analysis in singling out the differences, but then it will be, let's say, my job as a historian to interpret them and understand what they mean. Obviously, you know, intentional differences that have been decided by the capi or the religious leaders, the rabbis, have, you know, a certain meaning for the community and for the history of the community. A decision made by the publisher has a different meaning. Could be, as I said, simply economical. The reuse of matrices that already exist tells me less about a certain Jewish community than rather more about the publisher itself and about his choices or his choices for the 19th century, let's say. But it will be my job to try to distinguish between them and to understand the reasons laying behind them. It's clear that changes that are made on purpose are relevant, and changes that are not on purpose are less relevant. Up to the point of typos, typos are, for this type of analysis, are irrelevant because they're not made with an intention, obviously.
Thank you very much. Deborah asks, first of all, she thanks you for a great presentation. Then she asks, what are the results that you currently expect, and why is a DH approach for this type of research? And why is a DH approach for this type of research?
Yes. It's difficult to identify exactly what type of results I can expect. However, I can say a few things. That, for example, there are ways to identify clusters, so-called clusters of words that repeat themselves in the different prayers and in the different parts, and the software that I will then use after, not the scriptorium that I'm only using for the transcription. What I will use after for the analysis will help me exactly identify these clusters of words, which then can be helpful to identify even minimal changes in the texts or the prayers. One methodology that I'm planning to utilize, one among different ones, is to also take horizontally, for example, take one specific prayer and analyze it horizontally throughout the same texts, throughout the different editions of the same text. Sometimes I don't necessarily need the whole text, but only parts of it. I can identify some prayers that, in my opinion, can tell me more, or in opinion of other experts, can tell me more about certain Jewish communities. As I briefly mentioned in the lecture, the digital approach is important for two reasons, is necessary for two reasons. One, the mere size of the corpus. Let's try to imagine that I would have to read 44,000 pages, but not just read them, but read 44,000 pages and sort of like annotate where there are differences, or I don't know, keep in mind the differences, etc. It's clear to anyone that this is, not doable by hand within a medium time span of a research project, a lifetime, perhaps. So the size of the corpus is one reason. The other reason is, of course, the recently developed tools of the digital humanities really can help me not only, transcribe the text and everything, but also, for example, identify these clusters of words, and the tools of the so-called, we will not go into it, but the so-called text mining, which are codes of programs with Python, for example, that I can use to identify certain things in a text. These are the elements for which the support of the computer science experts will be crucial for my work.
Thank you very much. I will read out one more question, and then after your answer, I will open microphones so that people can continue asking you questions. I know that some people are very interested to find out where you're located. Excuse me. But the question I'm going to read out is, so as you've shown, specific communities for which a certain prayer book was printed were indicated in the title page. Are we sure they were actually distributed to said communities, or could they actually be used by other communities?
This is a very good question, actually, which complicated my research at the beginning. Well, I have seen, and many of you probably know, for example, many of the prayer books printed in Livorno for the Sephardim were not just used by the Sephardim of Livorno or of other Italian cities, for example, but were traded throughout the Mediterranean to the aforementioned communities, not only communities of Italian Jews, but to any Sephardi communities around the Mediterranean. But these were relatively simple to identify because in these cases, it's explicitly written in the title page. The problem is that in some cases, a title page says, for example, this is a book printed for the Ashkenazim of Italy, And actually, I don't find this book distributed in Italy at all. I have an example of this. I have to say, speaking with other colleagues that are in contiguous aspects of the research, they found out, because this is a part which I didn't see. For example, some prayer books printed in the German city of Fürth, they were printed in the title page, it read, for the Ashkenazim of Italy. And then this colleague actually went to analyze the registers, the registers of the publisher, where the sailing registers, where they sold actually these prayer books. This is a part that is not part of my project, because I don't have the possibility of going to also consult the registers. But this colleague of mine exactly found out that although they were mentioned as prayer books for the Ashkenazim in Italy, they were only sold in Fürth and around Fürth, actually. So this means what? That the printing house of Fürth used a matrix that was already used actually to print the prayer books for the Ashkenazim of Italy, to print, I don't know from where, possibly from Vienna or from other locations, to save, not having to develop their own matrix and print their own books for the Ashkenazim in Fürth or around, because after all, they at least thought they were using basically the same text, because these were only in Hebrew. So in spite of the title pages, one has to be careful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grazi. Thank you all for being here. Again, it was wonderful to see so many people from all kinds of different countries all over the world. I will now open microphones so you can all say thank you to Dr. Grazi and ask any more questions that are left over. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much once more, Dr. Grazi. And we'll see you all in our next event. The microphones are open.
Dr. Grazi, that was really most interesting, very fabulous. Where are you at the moment? I didn't catch the beginning of the...
Well, my institution, my working location is the Leibniz Institute of European History in Mainz, in Germany. So I'm actually carrying out this research in Germany. Physically, right now, I'm actually in Italy at the moment, but only, you know, in a contingent way. My institution is the Leibniz Institute of European History.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, come on. Come on, you can do it. Come on, Daisy. Thank you.
Grazie, Dr. Grazi.
Grazie. Bye-bye.
Hi, thank you all.
Ciao.
Can I ask a question?
Thanks.
Of course.
I have a question. I'm interested in kind of the political changes. In this period, was there still censorship? I'm particularly interested in Italy, in the Venetian books that are printed in Venice, and wondering if there was an effect, if there's still church censorship, and if there was effect in the change of from between 1797, when the Venetian Republic falls, and then first the French and then the Austrians coming in before the Republic is formed. Is there a change in the Minhag in those periods, and is there still any political and church influence and censorship?
Thank you very much for your question. So the premise is that in the printed books that I have seen, that I've analyzed, in the books themselves, there is no trace of censorship. But my understanding and my feeling is that the censorship took place before the printing, and this is a part where for me it's more difficult to investigate. But however, I mean, one clear indicator of this is that for the 19th century we hardly have any print of prayer books in Rome, although this was the largest community, obviously being in the papal state. At least until 1861, I mean, or until 1870 for Rome. But concerning Venice, actually, one has to keep in mind also another thing, that also following the aforementioned Vinograd bibliography, one notices also a bit of a shift of printing locations concerning Hebrew texts. Mostly up to the end of the, as you mentioned, 18th century, Venice was the main printing location for not only for Jewish prayer books, but for Hebrew texts in general. One notices a clear shift towards Livorno in the 19th century. As you also saw from the map that I showed, okay, only of the Machzorim, the Sidurim were more printed also locally, but the shift towards Livorno is clear. One notices also this aspect in this Vinograd bibliography. So I hope this answers at least partly the question.
Thank you so much. Grazie, buon lavoro.
Grazie mille, toda rabba.
Posso chiedere?
Certo.
Well, I will ask in English.
Yeah, perhaps for the others, yes.
Yeah, I understand. I have here Elbogen, and it is known as a major historian Jewish liturgy. What do you think is the plus and minus in his approach?
Sorry, I didn't hear the beginning. I'm sorry, I did not catch.
What do you think it is a plus and minus in his approach? Of course.
Whose approach? I did not hear the name.
Elbogen, Jewish liturgy. You don't know this book for sure?
No. I do know that book, but this is part of general description about liturgy and stuff.
Well, it's history of liturgy.
Yeah, of course. It's certainly important, for the determination and the creation of the basis of the historical background. Hypothetically, in the book that will come out, there will be also an introductory, both historical part and also on the history of liturgy, etc. But I would not like to, to specifically give one direction about the approach of one or the other, because this will, the part concerning my research will be, considering these prayer books exactly not just within the history of liturgy, but for the larger history of Italian Jewish communities and of Italian Jews. So I do not have an answer to your specific question. I can tell you that, of course, will be part of the theoretical foundation of what I'm going to describe, but it does not necessarily determine what I will say about my results. Perhaps it will. I will retake it out at the end, but at the moment, I don't have one specific answer to that question.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you all once more for being here. And Laila Tov from Jerusalem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Grazi. Have a good evening.
Grazie.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Dr. Grazi?
Adam?
Dr. Grazi?
Yeah?
Hi, sorry, just a minute. It's Lois Dubin.
Hi, hello, Professor Dubin.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I'll send you a message, okay?
Yes.
Because I want to bring something to your attention in case you don't know it and follow up a couple of things, but I thought I'd say hi.
Yeah, of course. I tried also to keep the lecture relatively general. It might be that certain things were not mentioned or...
No, you don't, it was very good. You don't have to be apologetic at all. It was great.
Okay. Good,
I just wanted to say hi because I'll send you an email later today or tomorrow.
I'm glad to see you in the audience.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Where in Italy exactly are you now?
I'm close to Bologna.
Nice.
Yes.
Things are okay?
Things are okay. Things are
Good.
okay. Things are good.
Now, you and I have not met, have we?
In New York once.
Oh,
Yes.
did we meet at the
At the Columbia event.
Okay.
Exactly.
I was trying to remember. I wasn't sure.
But it's a long time ago. I was just after my PhD.
It was around 2015, maybe, or 2010.
Yes, I don't remember. No, it was after 2012, before 2015. I don't remember
Okay.
the exact year.
But it was that conference that went between Columbia and was it CUNY? I think it was CUNY.
Exactly.
That, oh, okay, now I remember the room where
That's
we
the only
spoke.
occasion in which we met.
Okay. Benissimo. Good.
Benissimo.
Figured it
Thank
out.
you. Thanks.
Okay, great. I'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Once again, thank you all. Laila Tov from Jerusalem.
Laila Tov.
Ciao, Papa.
Hey.
Our youngest participant.
I assume so.
Laila Tov v'toda. And thank you. We're in Milan. There's several of us following you from Milan.
Ah, okay.
Yes, our rabbi is going to be writing we are drafting a new Siddur. I'm the co-president of the Reform Movement here in Italy.
Okay.
And we are drafting. So what a lovely surprise to find out your findings. And we are drafting a Siddur for Shabbat.
I'm glad.
First, and so Rabbi Sylvia Rothschild is doing all of that. I'm just the administrator and helping to get the financing. And so we're going to be integrating Italian Minhag with of course real reform concepts, modern reform concepts. So this was just an eye opener. Thank you so much. So I'm sure she'll be in touch with you. I'm sure she'll.
Yeah, for sure. Gladly.
That's
This will give a lot of work to historians in 100 years.
Yeah, it'll be digitally easy. They're going to be developing it digitally. In fact, I want to get them on the program now so that they get that done. That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining.